Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Hi everyone, this is the very latest Fly Culture Podcast. We're still in lockdown at the moment. Our thoughts are with everybody right now, and I hope everyone's coping, everyone's staying healthy, everyone's staying as fit as they can. And I hope in the interim that these little podcasts are something that you can enjoy when you're not able to get out on the water yourself. So my plan with these is really to try and make them a little bit more frequent. I'm going to try and do them weekly if I possibly can. So please bear with me if they don't, but I've got a nice little backlog of them that I'm going to try and release weekly that I hope you'll continue to enjoy. Thank you to everyone who has contacted me and said how much they're enjoying them. They're enjoying the magazine as well. It's really, really appreciated. If you do have any ideas for people you would like to appear on these podcasts as well, just drop me a line and I'll see if I can tee those up as well. But I'm really excited to be joined today by Dan Osmond. And he's one of the new breed of young fly anglers in the UK who they're out and about searching wild fishing in wild locations. He's also written 2 pieces for Fly Culture, the latest one's in the current spring issue. And he talks about spending 2 months living in his car, doing some work, along with, of course, plenty of fishing. And what I really wanted to do with this was get an idea of, from when I took up fishing, how things may be a little bit different and look at a little bit of a comparison. So it's great to have Dan Osmond with us today. How's it going, Dan?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Pete. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And how are you coping? Everything, you're staying safe and everything's okay in your neck of the woods right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty surreal time to be alive, but it feels bad to say that everything's well when you know other people are having hard times. But yeah, no, everything's good.
Good. And how are you coping with the lack of fishing? What do you do to fill your fishing time right now?
Well, it's taken something of a global pandemic to get me back into cycling, but cycling's been what I've been doing largely. And yeah, lots of reading, a bit of fly tying, and lots of time looking at pictures and videos to try and get some inspiration for when everything does hopefully open up again.
And so are you one of these, I look on social media and I'm seeing people tying boxes and boxes of flies. I've so far not succumbed to that right now. And I'm worried I'll peak too soon. And I enjoy fly tying. It's one of those things I dip in and out of. And I sort of did some because the grayling fishing, as you well know, sucked so much that I was tying flies for that, for the trout season, the coming trout season. And I kind of haven't got a lot to tie. What are you tending to tie right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much in my fly tying infancy. Probably picked it up in a serious way last year. Just not out of anything romantic, but just because buying a lot of flies costs a lot of money. So it's a bit cheaper to tie them yourself. And through the winter, as you said, the grayling season's kind of sucked. I think I only got out once. So yeah, I was doing quite a lot of pike fly fishing over the winter, given that the grayling fishing wasn't really going on. So hitting up the canal, so I've been tying up horrible, gaudy, flashy things for those, really tarty flies. But then the other night I tied 3 of those, and then I tied 3 size 20 little F flies. So it's quite a nice little contrast. But yeah, just trying to learn to tie different things up. This time of year, I'm tying a lot of heavy tungsten patterns. Most of the fishing that I did manage to get on when the season opened was nymphing, sort of heavy things to get through the runs, still carrying a little bit of water. But got plenty of dries up there as well. So hopefully when the time comes, those will see the water.
We were talking off mic and, my guess, it's not my guess, so my hope, but my hope obviously is for a bigger, wider picture of everyone feeling better and this thing being beaten in the best way it possibly can. But I wonder if we might just be missing the early part of the season, and I know we fish in similar neck of the woods. It's worth mentioning that you're based in Exeter, so really you're just up the road from me. And I think you've joined a club that was close to my heart, the Crediton Club, and I know some of the water there. In fact, their stretch of the tour's just down the road from me, which is wonderful. So if you've not fished that yet, get down there and go have a fish. But I wonder if we'll be hitting it just as the fish are really starting to get locked on to mayflies, back end of May, early June. It may not be the case. My sort of hope that's not keeping me going, but my hope is that might be when we start to see a little bit of lift in things and how we're allowed to go about living our lives again. But that's my hope, that we see that. So we'll have to wait and see. So my humble advice would be go tie some mayflies as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the past few years in Cornwall, and the dingy little rivers that I was fishing there, not dingy, they're beautiful, but they certainly weren't mayfly rivers. So I'm quite excited to see if I can catch any mayfly hatches this year. As you say, all things going well with restrictions and this and that.
Yeah. So let's look at your fishing. And where did you grow up? Are you local to Devon, or where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm one of these terrible people who grew up in Kent. So I grew up in a little village called Pembury, and that was pretty bereft of any good rivers nearby or any access to the sea. So as a kid, I was always really outdoorsy. Used to love watching Ray Mears and all the Attenborough documentaries, and part of the Scouts and going out wilderness camping and all those kind of things. And just sort of fairly outdoorsy generally. And then it was only on family holidays, got grandparents down in South Devon, and we always go up to Exmoor for summer holidays. And sort of going through there's a bit of the Barl that runs through Withypool. I used to go.
I know exactly. It's beautiful, isn't it?
I was one of those kids who'd go out with the net and the bucket and try and catch fish there. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
And so how did fishing come into your life? Were you the normal being where you were? And I'm similar. I was just across the Thames from you in the fly fishing mecca of Essex. How did fishing actually come to you? Was it via course fishing or any other means?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, none of my family fished. My dad would talk about when he was a kid growing up that he'd do a bit of dabbling for fishing. But I was one of those kids that when we were all sort of early secondary school, everyone got into mountain biking. We'd go out, build dirt jumps and go trail riding and just hang out and spend as little time in the house as possible. And then there are a couple of lads there who they'd go fishing at the weekends with their dads. And it was during those times sort of going like catching fish in Withypool and like going rock pooling. I thought, this is quite inefficient trying to chase fish with the net. It'd be good if I could make some little hooks or some fishing line like I'd seen on the Ray Mears programs. And I sort of proposed this to my parents, and they told me I should probably just get a fishing rod and go about it properly. So yeah, went in from there, popped into the local fishing shop. This is probably when I was about 13 or 14. There's a tackle shop in the nearest town, Tunbridge Wells, called The Friendly Fisherman.
Andy Lush.
Yeah, Andy Lush.
Yep.
And yeah, literally just walked in and said, I'm interested in fishing. What do I need? And yeah, they took me from there. So I owe those guys a lot.
And was that course fishing there? And you were sort of chasing course species. What were you chasing then, and how were you doing it?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I just wanted to catch fish. So I started off with a little float rod, catching little carp and roach and rudd and tench and all the usuals. And then after a couple of years, sort of you move on from that, you realise it's quite easy catching fish on maggots. So you start thinking maybe target some larger things. So I sort of fell into the camp of it was quite difficult to access wild fishing in Kent. So the next most exciting thing for me was carp fishing and trying to catch big fish that way. So sort of went down that lane. And yeah, always found it really, really interesting trying to catch bigger fish, perhaps on surface tackle or on float or sort of less conventional tactics. And I watched all the fishing programs as a kid. I exhausted Matt Hayes, which looking back on it now is probably a little bit cringy, but it was, I'd wake up at, I think it was like 6 o'clock. It'd be on a obscure channel called Quest, and you'd be able to catch Matt Hayes and Mick Brown on there. And that was my daily viewing to keep me inspired. So I'd see all these things of sea fishing and fly fishing, and they always looked really interesting. But to where I was then, it just seemed a bit inaccessible and far off. So yeah, it was up until going away to university, it was pretty much course fishing for me.
And so where did fly fishing come in for you? Where did that start? Or was Matt's programs the things that sort of put the thought in your mind and you thought you'd be interested in that? Or how did the fly fishing evolution start for you?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of fly fishing came in first, I guess, from having seen people fly fishing for carp at some of the waters that I was at. I thought that was really interesting, because I really liked that visual thing of trying to catch fish on the surface and then you can target particular fish. But even then, it seemed quite inaccessible because of I was working a paper round and eventually got a job in a kitchen of a restaurant, but it's still just enough that it was keeping the mountain biking going and a little bit of fishing. So I always thought it was really quite inaccessible to someone like me. And then for my dad's 50th birthday, my mum surprised him. He's always said that he doesn't much fancy fishing. He always sort of joked about my fishing. So why are you going out in the cold? You're not going to catch anything. And then my mum bought him, I paid for him to have a day with Nick Hart over at X Valley Fishery, because he always said if he was going to do any fishing, then fly fishing looked quite good to him. And he was a sucker for it, He's probably worse than me now. But yeah, it was through that. My dad said that I had to meet this cool guy, Nick. So I went over to X Valley Fishery, literally just have a chat with Nick. And that was really nice. And it was sort of through chatting to Nick that he got me thinking about fly fishing and thinking about affordable and accessible fly fishing as well, that it's not just sort of these older tweed wearing people, things like fly fishing with carp or fly fishing on little rivers, that there is stuff out there that is pretty accessible and pretty exciting. So yeah, I guess that's what got the spark going. And then subsequent to that, I went on to a fly casting lesson about 6 months later at a local still water in Kent. That was fine, but it sort of had that similar feeling to a coarse fishing lake, in that it was better than being surrounded by tarmac, but it still wasn't really a genuine wild experience. Fish are being stocked in there, and it's a nice thing, catching fish there, but it didn't really feel as authentic. Yeah.
It's interesting, but Nick, obviously, as you know, is a good friend of mine, and it's heartbreaking to hear what's happened at X Valley as well, because it was a wonderful fishery, and I don't know if you got to fish the stream that ran around it as well. The X there, did you fish that?
Yeah, that's really what got the wild trout fishing going for me. So the year after my dad had this introductory lesson, he decided that he wanted to have another guided day with Nick, and very kindly he said that I should come along with them as well. So the two of us, dad and lad, fishing day out with Nick, and we did a bit of casting in the morning on the lake. And I said all those horrible things about lakes, but really the fishery there, it was beautiful. But then getting into the river, and I caught probably a little 9-10 inch brownie.
Perfect.
But also saw you probably know it, but there's that wall which has the run. This is going to be entirely unhelpful for anyone else listening in, but there's a wall and it had a little riffle in it, and just in the slack water ahead of it, I could see a little rise coming up, and cast a little. I think it was a little CDCF fly up into there, and had a grayling take that, and catching a grayling on the dry, it was amazing. So yeah, that place has really got a special place in my heart. It's such a shame to see it go. But I keep little notes of all of my fishing, and in my fishing logbooks, I've got several sketches of each one of the bends and riffles and features and logs in that stretch of river. So yeah, amazing place. Really grateful to have had some time there before it did pass on.
It is a wonderful legacy for Nick, and as you know, and I'm sure listeners do, that I've had him on a couple of times now as well. But it's wonderful, and myself to a lesser degree, that you meet people that somebody like that has had such an impact on their fishing. And it was lovely because I happened to be talking to Nick about something else, and I happened to mention you, and he said, "Oh yes, I taught Dan, and it's fantastic." And how that seed is nurtured and then grows, and it's a really lovely legacy to have as a fishing guide or an instructor, that your passion has rubbed off on people and made them feel the same as you do. And there's a lot of people that you can take out that it may be a experience sort of day, and you can tell, I've been doing it, or I'd been doing it long enough that I knew. But you get people like yourself and many, many others that the bite and the hold is really something and develops into something much deeper and much stronger. And my suspicion is that people who listen to this as well have had a similar sort of path, be it a family member. It may have been somebody who introduced them as well, but they're lovely legacies to have, aren't they? And I'm sure Nick will be listening to this, so it'll be lovely for him to hear you speak so fondly of the time that you spent with him and at the fishery and on the river. And I know he's got some other, or I hope he's got some other things planned as well. So hopefully he'll be out guiding it as he normally is before too long as well.
Yeah, I mean, immensely grateful to Nick, so I just wish him all the best with what's ahead. But yeah, really nice guy. During that time that we were out fishing on the river, you could see I was getting very frustrated that I kept on missing bites. And the West Country trout, when they hit the dries, they're pretty quick. And for whatever reason, I was off the game that day. And my dad had to head home. It was his birthday. He promised that he'd be back to see my brothers and my mum. And Nick said, "You stay here and I'll give you a lift back home a couple of hours' time once it's dark." It's those little things, that you didn't have to do, but it made all the difference. And then chatting about...
So that was the starting point for you.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you say about the West Country trout, because I know when I'm doing guiding days, I'm going to say, look, you're going to miss a lot of fish. It's not your fault. They just throw themselves at it. They whack it. They do whatever. And quite often they're not going to stick, aren't they? It's funny how it is. And I remember I had a day, we're recording this just after the Wild Trout Trust auction has finished, actually. And I had a day with Roger Smith in the Malverns fishing for trout, and it was just lovely the way they took. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I'm not missing fish and stuff like that. So it's really nice to go away to have fish like that. But then at other times when they are more confident, and I don't know if you found the same as well. I told you we'd go off on a tangent somewhere or other. But interestingly, after I met you on Dartmoor, which we're coming on to, my friend Luke, who I'm sure I introduced you to as well, Luke Kozak, we went and fished the Tor afterwards, just downstream from the Crediton bit, actually. And we just shared a rod, and we went, and the fish were, and I said to him, I remember that because I said, wow, these fish are taking really nicely and confidently. And I wonder if part of that is time of day as well. So if you're fishing for fish during the day, they may be coming from a little deeper in the water as well.
Yeah.
I've also got this sort of little theory that the fish, sometimes you may see one sipping away. And this is really for our streams, but I'm sure there's probably some other streams that's a similar sort of case, that he's eating, or she is eating quite happily, and then you cast to that fish and the take is nothing like what you were experiencing. And it makes me wonder sometimes if it is obviously a different food source or whatever, it's a bit of territory, I don't know. But I also wonder sometimes if it's another fish in the vicinity that has come from a different position and has travelled quickly to try eat the fly before the one that was rising. I'm probably totally wrong, but I did wonder if that was sometimes the case in those situations, but I don't know if you've any thoughts on that or not.
Entirely possible. I mean, I guess never really know the answer to that one, which is kind of, to be cliched, is a nice part of the mystery, isn't it? Trying to speculate and pick away at those ideas and never really know. But I mean, I guess a lot of these rivers in the West Country are typical of being fairly low in nutrients. There's not a huge amount of food coming in. There's a fairly high predator risk. So they've got to try and quickly get in there and compete if anything is coming along. Hence, they're going to be hitting tries a lot of the time. On the one hand, I find it annoying that you miss a lot of the bites, but then they'll often come up to some fairly horrendous dry patterns that I've tied, which probably don't resemble what they're eating at all. But because it's a bit of food there, especially up on Dartmoor, anything that floats, it seems like they'll hit it. So they've got to try and get in there quickly. But whether that means they're really going to commit to it or if they're just going to investigate it, it's hard to know. But yeah, special fish.
Yeah. No, I love them. I absolutely adore them. So when you had your day with your dad and Nick, were you living in Devon then?
Yeah, so I was living down in Cornwall. So I moved at 18 down to study a zoology degree in Cornwall. That was great, down in Falmouth. And then subsequently to that, I did a research master's as well, sort of more in the aquatic ecology kind of area. So meeting up in Exmoor during the summer was a bit of a midway for the family.
Nice.
Yeah.
And did you get to fish that section?
Of the river?
Oh.
Up by Withypool.
Mm.
No, I've still never wet a line there. Trying to think. It did look at fishing down Tar Steps Way, but it's as with all of these things, half the work is just trying to find out who to ask and who has the rights, let alone paying for them or anything like that. So in that convoluted world and having more accessible water available, never quite got around to that. But
So you're migrating, or you've migrated to the West Country and Cornwall. Like I said a couple of minutes before, that I first met you at the Wild Trout Trust get together, I think 2 years or so ago. That was on Dartmoor. And I know we started getting chatting there, and I'm always keen and passionate for younger people any way I can help or encourage them as well. And not that you needed anything, because I could see that immediately on speaking to you, it was there. But we're on Dartmoor, and is that a special place for you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Dartmoor's been. I first visited when I moved down to Cornwall, so within about 6 months. I've been helping out with Duke of Edinburgh Awards for the past 5 or 6 years now, ever since I finished my one. I think it's a really cool thing to get young people out and about in the outdoors. And we had some Duke of Edinburgh kids over in Dartmoor. So that's how I first came to know it, and spending time out there with friends, wild camping and, just hiking and those kind of things. So Dartmoor I had that relationship with it before the fishing. And I started looking at the rivers and thought, these are quite nice. There must be some trout in there. And then, as you do, start Googling away and find the Duchy of Cornwall fishery, which is just amazing. The amount of water that's accessible through that. So would move from, you'd see a group of D.V. kids into camp and make sure they're all happy and they're all well. And then as soon as you're off duty, I'd be running back down to the river with the waders, with official hat off and fishing hat on.
Nice.
So that's how I came to know Dartmoor, and I still really enjoy it if I'm passing through. I had a few nights where camp over in Dartmoor and just spend a couple of hours fishing in the evening, and then sleep in the bivvy bag and get up the next day and head off. And it beats stopping in at a youth hostel or anything like that.
Yeah, and it is. Where is your? You may not want to give details away, but where is your favourite place to fish up on Dartmoor?
I think the nicest place just for an experience, we went up onto my fiancée Charlotte and I. We went up onto the East Dart, so probably about 7 or 8 kilometres up from Postbridge, so quite far away from any footpaths or for anything like that. There's nothing special about the fish particularly. They were no different to any other Dartmoor fish, but just that experience of going out we were out for 3 days with all of our kit in our bags, and I had the rod and the reel and just a box of flies and a little bit of line stashed in the pocket, and then pitching up the tent, probably about 4 or 5 in the evening, and a few hours fishing, and then making some dinner, and that was real special. So that has a special place in my heart. And then also up on the West Dart, up above two bridges, really close to the parking there, just sort of 100 yards up. And that's a really nice stretch of river. I took my buddy Stuart, it was his birthday, and we knew there wouldn't be any fish rising. It was just way too early in the season for the Dart, and it was the evening. There's everything wrong if you're going to try and catch someone a fish. And yet it was a lovely evening. We cast some lines. He's pretty new to fly fishing, so it was nice to see him having a go, and good practice for the season ahead. And then popped over into the pub, had a nice meal. So yeah, really nice, really nice.
Really interesting what you say about when you packed your stuff, and it is the most simplistic form of fishing that, generally speaking, you can rock up with a dry fly. You might sometimes need a bigger one to try and bring the fish up, but all you need is a few flies, some line, a rod, thigh waders or chesties, and you're there. And it's interesting, as anglers, we do sometimes, I think sometimes it feels like we carry too much stuff. And I go through this sort of, I want to carry less, so I fish with just a lanyard, and I've changed to a very, very basic pack, only so that I can carry a bottle of water with me and a jacket should I need it. That was the downside, and a net just in case I caught a nice one. And I remember when I was working for Nick over at X Valley, and when I would guide people on the river, be it there, be it the Barl, be it wherever, that I would just guide with a lanyard and a few flies in a fly box. This is way before your time, but in the olden days, you could get, when you bought some flies from Orvis, they'd give you a little plastic box with 6-9 sections in it, and I'd just have a few dries in there and a few nymphs, and it seemed to work just fine. And it's funny how we do get bogged down in having to have, this is the latest pattern, this isn't, and this is the new material, this isn't now, this is the one, nothing else is going to work. And it's kind of interesting to see. And over the winter, I just fished a pheasant tail in various forms, with a hackle, with a CDC one, with whatever it might be.
Nice.
And it seemed to, in the rare occasions I could get out then as well because of the weather, it seemed to work really well for me. When you're fishing, let's say on Dartmoor, you're fishing nice and light. If you're fishing a lowland river, would you be carrying the same amount of kit, or would you be carrying a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So a lot of, I find myself doing a lot of short fly fishing sessions. Particularly if I'm up somewhere like Dartmoor where it's quite open, I might not even pack the waders. I'll just wear a pair of sandals or a pair of jungle boots that I'm quite happy to get into the water and get wet should I need to, but probably 50% of the time don't have to. And I guess sort of those lowland rivers, and particularly more overgrown rivers, I will commit to getting in the waders. And particularly if I'm out for a long session, I like to carry some water with me. So with the fast bites, you've got to try and keep yourself sharp and happy. Even though most of the time I completely forget to eat or drink anything until I'm walking back to the car. But yeah, just by virtue of when I started fly fishing in Cornwall, I managed to look at the OS maps, and I was trying to look for a little bit of free water, which no one had any claim over. I just cycled to and from that. To start off with, I didn't own any waders, so I'd be going in my swimming shorts and sandals, and I could stick it out during the summer, I could stick it out for a couple of hours without getting too upset. So just by virtue of that kind of situation, found it pretty easy to travel light. But who knows, 5 years' time, I might have accumulated all the tackle and I'll be carrying 5 rods with me everywhere, and hard to say.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I can never figure it out. I've gone down to 2 boxes, a nymph box and a dry box.
Yeah.
That's it. And I'm trying really, really hard to work with what I have. The podcast I did with Pete Hayes and Don Stasica was so interesting and opened my eyes about the approach to fish and the fly patterns. And so in my rustic way, I've tried to tie up a few of those as well, and I'm going to try those. Midge patterns are always useful, and caddis, and having them in various sizes rather than multitudes of different patterns. I wonder if might be an easier way to go, but we'll see. I usually get suckered into it and change everything as the season goes on. This may be the exception, but I'm trying. I think that's probably the fishing guide in me as well. But not guiding now, I guess, will probably make that a little bit easier. But we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
So, what sort of angler would you describe yourself as? Because it's interesting that you say that you have shorter sessions. Is that to work them around work, or is it just you like to go for 2 hours or 3 hours, and that fills the void for the short term?
Yeah, it's hard to know, really. I think a lot of it is just that convenience of fitting it around work. I'm lucky in that I've just started a PhD, so that's really it's a great opportunity. I'm grateful for that work, and it's reasonably flexible. I don't get chased too heavily if I'm not in the office 9 to 5, so I can pop out for a couple of hours at lunchtime and just work a little bit later and make sure I get all the reading done. And then as a student, even more free. So, try and be attentive to your studies, but if there's a nice set of weather coming through, it'd be rude not to take a few hours at lunchtime or in the evening. And then I guess a lot of it as well that through the summer, and I wrote about it a little bit in the article, is that it'd be the evenings that I'd be free, and it would be very rare that I'd get a whole day free. And in those circumstances, I might try and take that time to meet up with some friends to go climbing or something else. Whereas fishing is a really nice thing. You've got a few hours by yourself. You're close to some water. Just grab the rod and go running down there and see what's going to happen.
Nice, like your style. You touched on the article there, and you've written a couple of pieces for Fly Culture now. Have you enjoyed doing those? Has that been an easy process for you to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a blast. I was a little bit, I was shocked when I first got a message. Definitely still feeling the imposter syndrome, but really honoured and grateful for it. One of a big influence for me when I was first taking up fishing in Cornwall and trying to embed myself in this, and in absence of any other formal community or instructors, just spent a lot of time picking through Eat, Sleep, Fish articles and sort of trying to digest as much of that as I could. And I towards the end, I toyed with the idea of trying to submit something, but I always felt massively underqualified, as I'm still not, I wouldn't call myself that good a fly fisherman. I'm a punter at best. But it's really nice trying to, having gained so much from other people writing, trying to relate a little bit of your own experience back to other people and hope that connects with them in some way. Even though I might not be the best at catching them, I really love wild fish and that whole wild wilderness experience. And even the process of writing it down yourself and trying to put a piece together, I find quite a nice reflection for yourself. As much as trying to connect anyone else to it, actually having the time to digest it for yourself and think what was special about that day, what was special about that experience. And hopefully some other people get something out of that as well.
That's really interesting, and I'm touched that you used to read Eat, Sleep, Fish. If you are a listener and haven't seen it, this was really the precursor to Fly Culture that I ran for 6 years, that we put a magazine out. It was an online magazine. It was free. It was not for profit. And the doors were always open to people to submit articles. And the reason for that is that it doesn't matter, I don't think, how experienced you are. If you're passionate about something, the passion will come through. And even with Fly Culture now, that if somebody sends me an article, I will quickly read it and get a sense of how it feels to me. And if that comes through, that sort of passion, it doesn't have to be I tied a size 22 tups on and my leader was 9.3 feet long and stuff like that. But if they're really enjoying what they're doing and that comes across, well, if I like it, I think a lot of other people will. And that's the basis that we've worked that on. So it was an interesting process, and it sort of prepared me and got me ready for the magazine as well. And it felt time was right to do that. And I'm like a salmon that I want to swim across against the flow the whole time. When they tell me print media is dead, I want to bring a magazine, and that's how I like to try and do things, just to see. And it's been a fascinating process. And thank you for both of those articles. I've thoroughly enjoyed them. And the last one, if people haven't read the spring issue, was called Trout Bum. And for me, trout bum is a term that can be used too easily and too readily. And I'd like to explore this a little bit with you as well, because I think you do qualify as that. Somebody who's sleeping in his bloody car and fishing is a trout bum in my book. And so he parks near rivers. That to me speaks volumes. Do you feel you were a trout bum? Does that feel the right? I know you climb. I know you just mentioned you cycle. Do you feel a trout bum is the right phrase to describe you? And would I be right about that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I threw that title in as a placekeeper and thinking that I'd come up with something more witty in the meantime. By the time it was finished, it kind of fitted, I thought. But I guess the thing that I like about it is it's wrapped up in this whole other idea of being sort of a dirt bag. And something I found very formative is reading Yvonne Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing, and all these accounts of brilliant environmental activism and brilliant projects being done by people who are just so totally obsessed in kayaking or fishing or climbing or alpinism, that they've got, the rest of their life looks an entire shambles, but they're so dedicated to that they're doing brilliant things and really care and really good advocates for those. So for me, the whole trout bum thing is just sort of a dirt bag in that trout fishing community. So I'd quite like it's something that I'd like to sort of aspire to. But like you say, there's other things in my life going on as well, and it's all good. It's all good.
Do you think that being a trout bum is more associated with when you're younger and you sort of, I can't at 50 odd call myself a trout bum now, but the passion burns as bright. But do you think, like you say, the dirtbag sleeping in the car type thing fits with that role more readily when you're younger, and it's something that we drift away from, yet don't drift away from the passion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you haven't got dependents, it's part of the reason I decided to go and do that unpaid internship and sort of really embrace that and grab it as hard as I could with the whole living in the car and all. So I know sort of 10, 20 years time, that's going to be an irresponsible thing to do. But it's nice when you're young to take those opportunities and not have to worry too much. That maybe you've got £5 left in your bank account, but you've got a full tank of fuel and there's some fishing nearby and, you're going to get paid in a couple of weeks' time. So let's just ride it out. That it's a nice experience to have. And that passion's still there. I hope that passion's still there when I get older. But maybe, or hopefully, I'm sure Charlotte won't be too happy if I'm still living exactly the same way as I am now in 20 years' time. But we'll see.
I would think she won't be digging living in a car, will she?
I've tried to persuade her.
Yeah. So tell me about sleeping in a car. How did you, because I know you had some sort of contraption built up so that you could actually lay, yet it was like laying with the roof of your car about 3 inches away from your nose or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was pretty claustrophobic. I built this plywood box unit with a friend from Cornwall, Matt. He's a brilliant guy. He's built this whole workshop in his basement in his free time off from work. We set about building this box, which then has a folding platform. So the box sits in the boot, and then the platform folds out onto the front seats of the car. I've taken the back seats out for more storage space. And then that forms a bed. But as you say, it's about 3 inches from the ceiling. I have built it so it's slightly on a ramp so I can park the car in any direction and my head's still hopefully uphill rather than building it completely level. But yeah, on the nights that it was dry, I was definitely more eager to get the bivvy bag out and sleep out and save getting it all damp and humid and claustrophobic inside the car and just dip in to make some breakfast.
And is it as glamorous as we think it is? Because when you mentioned if it were raining, if it were miserable, I'm sure it's probably not quite as romantic as we can picture, is it?
No, I mean, yeah, I recently took it up for a couple of weeks of winter climbing in Scotland and was sleeping in the car for most of that. So it was more romantic in the summer than it was doing that. But yeah, there'd be bad nights. There'd be the times that it rained. There'd be the times that it was windy and it was cold, or you didn't have anything to do. And then when you're bored and you're just sat in the car, it's a pretty dull place to be, especially with the smell and everything. So yeah, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. It probably would be with a proper kitted out van, but you've got to take what you can get, haven't you?
But that's how you lose your trout bum status, I guess, when you go to it properly. But that's what happens as you get older, I think, anyway. So it's kind of interesting to probe this a little bit to see where we become a trout bum and where we leave being a trout bum from. And it probably, I think, as we're scratching a little deeper, it is as you get a little bit older or more mature or whatever it is, that sort of disappears a little bit more, yet the passion still burns as bright.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all good, isn't it? But yeah, it was a good experience.
So you also touched on that you like to climb as well. And I think I saw on your social media somewhere, and I think you just mentioned actually that you were up in Scotland climbing and stuff. What is it that appeals to you about climbing?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of that same thing of getting outdoors, seeing wild places, and also the company and the people that you meet. Those people are driven in the same way. So I really enjoy climbing sea cliffs. I think that's my favourite. Scotland was amazing, but just in terms of rock climbing, you get yourself in this committing position where you've abseiled out. You could be in a really popular walking spot along the Cornish coast. You abseil down, and you could be anywhere, and you're sort of committed to having to try and climb out there, and you don't know what the moves are going to be like. You don't know if there's going to be any protective gear that's going to stop you if you fall. And you're there with someone else. It's always a team, so you're relying on each other. That is a very real situation that if something goes wrong, you could kill one of you or both of you. So you're very much dependent on the other person. But that means that if you don't fall out with each other, all the highs that you enjoy, it's a really nice. It really draws people together, and it brings those kind of people who have that.
So it's kind of like fishing with a dangerous edge.
Yeah. Maybe if all you ever did was some sketchy wading, then I think I get in the same head game with sketchy wading as I do as climbing sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the community like? I don't really know it that well. I watched that amazing documentary of the guy who climbed El Capitan without any safety stuff.
Yeah.
But is
Alex
there a
Honnold.
similar sort of equivalent? I guess there probably is, because I would think climbing's even cooler than fishing in that sense. But is there in the UK a similar sort of or the equivalent of a trout bum? What's the equivalent of a climbing trout bum?
I guess a dirtbag climber, maybe. A similar kind of thing. Yeah, a big thing of like people just living in their vans and maybe doing a bit of outdoor instructing to scratch some money together, and then spend a month doing that, and then spend a month off climbing, and then when they run out of money, go back and work some jobs and do it again. So that kind of community, yeah. I guess a similar kind of thing. What I've really enjoyed about the whole fly culture and Eat, Sleep, Fish and the podcast is nice experiences being put out there without that much emphasis on this is the how-to. And you get these things in climbing that there's, nice podcasts to listen to and things, and it sort of engages you with the culture of what's going on. And one of the guys says that he feels like he's lived his life in service to climbing and that community. I guess that's sort of a nice thing to look at with fishing, that I hope when I put out any articles or any pictures or stuff that it's inspiring people, and that's doing sort of some kind of service to the fishing community rather than just sort of feeling like you're trying to inflate yourself.
That's quite cool. I like that. Yeah, I like that. And I think, again, sitting here as somebody older, that's how I've always felt about the fishing and these things that we do, is to try and give something back to, something that means so much. And that's, how Eat, Sleep, Fish came about. And, if you are listening, haven't found it, by the way, we put out 80 issues or episodes on the internet, and I never missed a month. And like I say, it was free, not for profit, but that came about. I was in Montana with my friend Ray, and we were fishing Rock Creek just outside Missoula, which is an awesome trout stream. And I just caught a fish, and I just sat on a rock for a while. And I said to my friend, Ray came along, said, "How's it going?" And I told him, "This is just amazing. Wouldn't it be cool to share these experiences with somebody?"
Yeah.
And that's how it came. And I came home, and that was it. And within 2-3 months, we'd had the thing out there. It was great to do that and to meet so many cool people and to see people to talk to about the magazine, and they'd bumped into people and said, "Oh, I read it," and it was extraordinary seeing that, and it was great fun to do. So it is, fishing, as I sense with yourself and myself and so many other people who are probably listening as well, means so much to us. It doesn't mean we're one dimensional by any means, but it just means a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the fishing's amazing. The wild place is amazing. The ecology is, it's a beautiful thing. But then the community around it of people who think and engage with that as well always draws, I think, nice, like-minded people, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So being in the West Country, and you've been here, how many years have you been down here now?
So this will be my 5th year down west.
Where's your favourite place in the West Country? Where do you like to fish the most?
Yeah, I think, as we were touching on earlier, still Exmoor, sort of that connection is the first place that I came to know wild trout fishing. That up on the Exe is beautiful. The East Lynn, just a phenomenal river. On the opening day of the season this year, Stuart and I went up to the Heddon Valley, and what a place that is. Just fishing directly off of the beach and then walking through this amazing steep-sided valley. I think Exmoor's the place deepest in my heart. But I've joined the Crediton Fly Fishing Club this year. I've got all the water on Dartmoor nearby. This is moving up to Exeter in October, so I missed last season here. But I'm just really excited this year, try and see as many different rivers as possible.
Fantastic. You mentioned the Heddon Valley, and I think the picture in the very, very first fly culture of Luke looking down the valley, that's the valley there. And when I was sent the picture, don't say where it was, because it wasn't on the scene then, and it looks absolutely stunning. I know Nick's been down there a couple of times as well, hasn't he? And he absolutely loves it. Says it's fantastic as well.
Yeah,
it is those tiny little streams, isn't it? They're the ones that really I love too. It's the intimacy of it, the honesty of it, fast broken water. It's just awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean the fish aren't even the biggest there, that if you really want to catch big fish, I guess I'd be fishing the Colm a lot more. But all of that runs through a lot of agricultural land. It suffers the same sort of erosion and siltification, and it's got nothing on being on one of those fast-flowing Exmoor rivers. They're just gorgeous. Nice place.
So we've talked a little bit about fishing. We've talked about the trout bum thing. We're doing this on a sort of a FaceTime thing, and as I know Dan anyway, that he's sitting in a Patagonia cap with a great big super cool beard and looks every inch the fishing bum. And so it makes me feel you're qualified to probably answer this question. And how does fishing feel to you right now? What is the state of it? How does it look to you right now?
Wow, yeah, I'm not sure I feel entirely qualified to answer the question. I'm enjoying being in the fishing community right now. It's been pretty encouraging. There seems to be a good emphasis on conservation that really you'd expect people who spend most time on the water to be most concerned and most in touch with what's going on.
The social media aspect of it as well is probably, you've obviously come all the way. For us old fossils, it's a relatively new sort of thing, but that must be a good way for you to connect with your community, as you say, be it climbing, be it fishing, be it cycling, whatever. Do you enjoy being part of that community as well? How is that? How do you see that as well? As it's an important part of fishing now, isn't it? And spreading the word about fishing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say whether social media is good or bad. I think it's just a tool. How it gets used is good or bad. It's not the platform itself, which is innately wrong. And you hear a lot of people talking trash on kids nowadays, saying that they're not getting outdoors because they're always on their Xbox or they're always out, on Facebook or this or that. But I found it immensely helpful. Like Nick, when he heard that I was heading over to Exeter, he put me in touch with Sam Baycock, who he knew was studying at the same university as me. And then I didn't even meet Sam until about 3 years later, but it was through messaging him, getting to know the local fishing, and using Sam was immensely helpful, and got lots to thank him for that. But it was that platform which enabled that communication. So it's been helpful. Yeah.
And I think right now, with everything that's going on, we're seeing the good of it. It's easy to knock it a lot, isn't it? And there are aspects of it I may agree with. There are aspects of it I may not agree with. But right now, we're seeing it used in a really, I think, positive and good way, aren't we?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my hope is that it makes it more accessible to people out there who think, I'd quite like to visit one of those rivers or see a scene like that, or see the colours on a trout and think that's kind of groovy. I wish I could go out and do that. And my hope is that it makes it more engaging, because I found it a difficult thing to access myself. It took all those years of thinking it'd be kind of cool, but not knowing how. And now I guess you could look at a picture of the Head and Valley, message the person who's put it up there and say, hey, I'm interested in fishing. Can you help me? And, if anyone did that to me, you'd want to help them out, because you enjoy it immensely yourself. And so I hope that makes it a lot more accessible.
Cool. Excellent. Well, fishing, when it comes to fishing, how do you like to fish? Would it be a dry? Would it be a nymph? Or do you just go with whatever's working and just go with the flow?
Yeah, I mean, I've quite enjoyed this winter and early season. I've been trying to learn a bit of long line nymphing, and that's something that I've never really delved into before, and tying up the heavy nymphs for that and giving it a go. And I found it really effective. It's been really good. I had a day up on the Yo last week, and took a couple of fish, 12 and 13 inches, which for those rivers are quite nice fish. And it felt like good angling, finding little pots to put them in. So people knock dredging with nymphs, but it's been quite rewarding learning that technique. I think if they were rising to dries, I definitely want to cast a dry at them, But if they're feeding on nymphs and subsurface stuff early in the season, it's nice to see a dry to a rise, but I'd much rather try and target them where they're actually feeding. And in the same way, my biggest trout came from us doing a survey on a river, urban river, walking along, and I saw whacking great trout for this river. I'd fished it a couple of times before, but never seen a fish nearly as big as this. So I came back the next day with a little fly rod, 7'3" weight, really tight, horrible little casting. And I put a dry over it. I put a different dry over it, put some nymphs through it. It wouldn't touch anything. And then I pulled a streamer past its face and bang, it took. And that's my best trout to date still. But for a fish to get that big in that little river, and knowing sort of the kind of ecology that's going on in there, it must be eating bigger food items. And maybe it will key into insect hatches if there are any big ones. But I'm convinced if you want to be feeling like you're matching the hatch and matching what they're feeding on, you've got to accept that trout don't always just eat midges. Sometimes they are.
And the big guys will turn cannibalistic, and that's probably the way to find those guys, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know it's worked for me in the past in various things. So I'm sort of kind of like you. I go with the flow. I know Andy and I on a previous podcast talked about it, and I think we just sort of missed out what we were talking about in slightly different directions. I think we agreed but didn't agree. But you go with what's appropriate, I guess. I don't tend to nymph, as I've said. you're a nymph or tightline nymph, whatever people want to call it, in the trout season, and particularly, as you say, when the river gets low, and it has been dropping pretty quickly, and it's, I'm watching, even now I'm not fishing, and I'm watching the bloody gauges just to see, and I wouldn't be nymphing now, but it doesn't matter, people want to do it, but for me, I just don't want to do that. And having seen somebody who's on the river a lot, that I don't want to keep hitting water if the fish are bunched in one place, sort of thing. And as you know, down here we've had some really nasty weather, haven't we, to deal with, in the sense of no rain and incredibly low water flows.
The nice thing is that people seem to be fairly responsible, at least from what I've heard of this, that these are conversations which are happening, and it doesn't feel too much like you have to remind people that we kind of want there to be trout there tomorrow. But
yeah. So what is, I guess I know this, your ethos to, how do you feel about fishing? What is your ethos with fishing? Just to enjoy it and keep rocking and rolling?
Yeah, it's, I guess sort of if you had to cut me down in the middle and ask me what's at the very center of me, I guess the answer would be an ecologist and a conservationist. So as well as celebrating and enjoying, and it's brilliant. Also wanting to understand those systems and to try and protect them, because freshwater systems really they're not doing very well at all. And it can feel like the norm because it's close to home, but our rivers in the West Country face massive stress. And as you well know, tremendously sad story with salmon and sea trout runs down here. So wanting to use that platform as something that you really enjoy and that you're close to, and hopefully try and do some good with it to make sure it's still going to be there for my kids or their kids or whoever else.
Many congratulations on your engagement as well.
Thank you.
So you must be, when are you planning that? I suppose things are in the air for you as well, aren't they, just at the moment? Or are you the year after or a little bit further down the line you're getting?
Yeah, so the plan is for this July, but we didn't, when we put those plans together, we didn't plan for a global pandemic. So a little bit up in the air, but still going ahead for July. So fingers crossed that will come together, and everyone will be well by then. But who knows? Yeah.
And so, do you think that means that the trout bum status will be lost at the moment?
Maybe.
I suspect not, but that's my guess.
Yes, no. Charlotte's a really nice lass. She's really she's been out fishing with me lots of times, and she really likes hiking and climbing, and so I don't think I'll have to be civilized too much.
And so when it comes to fishing, do you have, where's the place that really ticks your box that you think, I would love to fish there? Where is that destination, be it UK, be it further afield? Do you have one in the UK, and do you have one further afield that you'd like to perhaps one time scratch the itch with?
We did have, I was out climbing with some folks up in Wales a few years ago, and we had a little wild camp next to a reservoir there. I think it's mostly natural, but they've dammed it to make it a little bit deeper. And as we were camping by the lake, we were just sort of sipping a little bit of whiskey out of the hip flask. It was really nice, and just could see, as far as the eye could see, across this really deep tarn, just rings everywhere. And every summer I said that I'd like to go back there with a fishing rod because it was just so ideal. But it was just it was a perfect evening for it that I'm almost afraid that I'd go back and it wouldn't be the same, and it would then ruin that experience because I've sort of built it up so much in my mind. But I'd like to get back there one day. And Ireland is a place that I've never been to Ireland, and I've heard brilliant things about it, both on the saltwater lure fishing side of things and the fly fishing, and encouraging things going on with their runs of salmon and sea trout compared to here. So yeah, it'd be nice to it seems such a far off thing, but it'd be nice to try and have a tangle with a salmon this year. So maybe Ireland would be the place.
The good grilse runs they're having there, aren't they?
Yeah.
If we get them on the tour, I'll let you know, and I promise you I'll take you on the tour. But like you said, we don't have a huge amount to play with. But somewhere like, how about somewhere like Montana or Colorado or Utah, or where does that float your boat in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I've never been over to the States, so it's hard to know exactly what it'll be like, whether it's going to be exactly like the books and the films that you see. It looks amazing, the scene there definitely seems to be more in tune with what I'm interested in. But then part of it is that it's already, you read these things about the average number of times that some of the fish in the more popular rivers there have been caught per year, and guides limiting the number of fish that can be caught per day. Starting to try and think, where's the next place, and if you want to have that adventure and that wilderness experience, somewhere which really excites me, the idea of is, Stuart spent a year out in Tasmania, and studied at the university there for a year. And as a temperate wilderness, Tasmania's still got a lot of places where maybe one person, maybe 5 people have walked there, maybe no one's ever walked there. It's and New Zealand's the other classic one, but it's nice to try and do something a little bit different. So maybe that would be the place.
I'm with you on that. And I've been fortunate enough to do the New Zealand thing, which was wonderful. But yeah, I'm all for something that's different. Again, being the salmon, I want to go against whatever the flow is. And there's places like Bhutan, and I don't know. There's lots of places that I thought of. The driftless area in Wisconsin, the chalk or the limestone in Pennsylvania. Those sorts of places as well. And different. They're a little bit different. I'm sure there's trout in the Mediterranean area that I know nothing about that would be kind of interesting as well. And all these sort of slightly different, not so well known. And again, coming back to Wild Trout Trust, the things I'd bid for in the auction were not the big name lots. They'd be the little streams that probably don't get the same sort of, highlights as some of the others. And it sounds like we're pretty similar in that sense, that we're always looking for something just a little bit different.
Yeah, and what's really exciting me is reading things about, in terms of, this is slightly on the nerdy side, but my PhD is working on the genetics of trout, and particularly how pollution affects them. And then looking at the evolutionary history of what we call brown trout. There seems to be there is a very different lineage sort of coming out towards the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe, and they've got some what appear to maybe not entirely different species genetically. It's hard to make the distinction, but things like people throwing out the soft-mouthed trout out there, and there's a trout which almost has like a grayling mouth over there, and the marbled trout, and all these. It'd be really nice to see. The nice thing about catching trout, Stuart and I had a day where we both caught an absolute bumper number of fish, but everyone was different, and that was just in one river. But to go over and see something as far as different from our trout as possible would be really interesting.
Yeah. Even funnily enough, coming back where you talk about fish that completely different. I don't know if you're talking that in the context of Dartmoor, but you could catch one fish that it looks like a chalk stream brown trout. Yet the next one can be dark and completely different whatsoever. They're just amazing, aren't they? How different they look, even in the same pool often.
No, it's we were fishing on the Lowman, and we had probably 5 or 6 fish from the pool before we moved on, and each one of them completely different. Some of them really, really dark, some of them hardly any spots on them at all, some of them really brilliant and vivid. One of them even only had one eye, probably not the nicest feature. But yeah, like you say, really, I turned around to Stuart at the end of it and said, if I ever complain about catching little brownies, have a good speaking to me, because it's just enjoying seeing that is brilliant.
They're just such great fish, aren't they? We're so lucky, and I know the podcast I did with Bruno feels exactly the same as well. And the fishing we've got here, we're so lucky, aren't we? That, as I've said before, you can drive over a hill and into another valley and another stream, and it can be fishable where one couldn't be.
Yeah.
The fishing will be different. The hatch might be slightly different, not as advanced or slightly more advanced. It's amazing, isn't it? And we're so lucky that it's on our doorstep, really, aren't we?
Yeah, and digging in over the past few months, trying to learn more about these trout populations, that it's not just sort of something that we've romantically come up with as anglers. There is genuine difference between all these different streams, that you could take a fish, take a bit of their tissue, and pretty accurately locate it to at least a region of rivers, if not a particular catchment, because there is that diversity across them. So if you're catching a trout, sort of way out West Cornwall, that is a completely different animal to if you're catching one from the Tor. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. A friend of mine, my good friend Gerald, actually sent me some images. He put a little slideshow thing together to help us get us through this thing of our grayling fishing. That wasn't well, there weren't many days. I usually get out at least once a week for grayling, and didn't. Did you manage to get some grayling done this winter, or did you catch a few?
I had one day that I attempted for grayling up on the Hadio, and I had lots of trout, and it felt very wrong, so I didn't go back there again. And yeah, just every other time, it was almost you couldn't write it to be as tragic as it was, because I'd be watching the river levels through the week, and it'd be dropping and dropping and dropping, and you'd get to Friday, and then you'd see the forecast for a bit of rain, and sure enough, Friday night it would spike, and yeah, so. I mean, I'm making excuses. I probably could have driven over to Dorset and hit the chalk streams there, but it was certainly not easy conditions to inspire you to want to get out grayling fishing.
Yeah. No, I've discovered that if I mention wintertime, the word fishing, that will probably bring rain on as well. So I've stopped doing that now. So I try really hard not to. But I enjoy those grayling days that we go and have breakfast somewhere.
Yeah.
Drink a lot of good coffee, and then eventually somebody will say, should we go then?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about stuff, and they're really fun days, and I miss those from that aspect. And that comes back to fly culture again a little bit more, that's why we're not a how-to, or it's about all of those moments. And you're talking about your friend Stuart and spending time with him and fishing together with him, and that's part of it all, isn't it? It's not the fish. It's the bigger part of it that makes it appealing to me, at least, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, particularly those early season days, it would be foolish to think that jump out at 9 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning and it's going to be blazing action from the get-go. It's much nicer to have a coffee or have a bit of time chatting about what's going to happen, have a good catch-up. And the fishing is never going to be, it's never been red letter days for me early season, but it's just sort of that whole excitement and sort of winding each other up and talking about the plans for the coming year, and maybe tangling with a fish or two. But you don't really want to, if you set your expectation to rush in and spend the whole day really focused on just trying to catch as many fish as possible, I'd certainly come away disappointed.
Cool. Dan, this has been fantastic. We've spoken for well over an hour now, and it's been great getting a view. I love, you're far too super cool for me. But hopefully our listeners have got a really good sense of a view from somebody who is passionate, loves fishing, like myself and like our listeners, and how much it means to you as well. And that's really come across really, really nicely. So thank you for that. Thank you for talking to me today as well. It's been really great. And I watch your fishing with great interest, and keep the fire burning and keep enjoying it. And hopefully we'll get to wet a line together at some stage. I know when we last hooked up that we talked about taking you on the tour somewhere or other and going to have a fish there. So I hope we get to do that this year. So thank you. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, Dan.
Oh, cheers, Pete. Well, the honour's been all mine, so thank you very much. And thanks again for putting my stuff out there.
You're most
Yeah.
welcome. Well, everyone, this is the Fly Culture Podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening and supporting what we're trying to do as well. And so thank you. We've got lots more plans, so I hope you'll look forward to those and enjoy them. I really enjoy sitting down and just talking fishing with people. So like I said at the very beginning, if you've got any ideas for people you'd like me to have a chat with, I'll be more than willing to listen to them. So contact me. And I look forward to putting out the next podcast for you real soon. But thanks, everyone, for listening. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll be fishing sometime soon.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.